Alright, YouTube, we're back. We're talking some Final Fantasy VII Remake. We're talking some Part 3, and we're talking multiple endings, which is a discussion I never really thought we'd have. It's something I've seen talked about a bit. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's like a popular discussion, but I've definitely seen like that concept suggested out there, right? And then I've seen a Reddit post within the last like day or so asking this question. So the person posted asking, do you want Part 3 to have multiple endings or one definitive ending? As a note for discussion, I'm specifically asking what you want to happen, not what will probably happen. Do you want there to be multiple endings depending on player choices, or do you want the devs and story writers to actually man up and end it regardless of how possibly decisive the ending will be? So to kind of give you my intricate thoughts on multiple endings when it comes to the remake project, no. Don't want it. I mean, first of all, like, I simply just don't want that. I want there to be a conclusive, concise story that they want to end the way they want it to end, right? That's just personally what I want. But also, like, we know that it's going to have a definitive ending of sorts because it's going to lead into the compilation, right? Lead into Advent Children. However that might, go. Who knows how wacky the third game could get. We know that it's supposed to lead into the compilation stuff, right? So there's going to be a decisive ending of sorts. Conceptually, I do enjoy multiple endings for certain games. I think it works, obviously, very well for particular games. I don't know that it's something that I necessarily want for, like, a Final Fantasy game, something that's very story-driven. I want there to be, again, a kind of focused story. It's very well for something like the Silent Hill series, which is very infamous for multiple endings, and something Square Enix related. We do have like the Nier series, right, with all kinds of different endings. But also, when we talk about multiple endings, at least in the context of something like FF7 Remake Part 3, do you mean like two endings, two different endings? Are you talking about like 5 different endings, 10 different endings? Like, what exactly do we mean, right? Because there's ways you could do like different endings that could work. It's something we have seen in the franchise before with something like Final Fantasy X-2. Which is a very weird game. A lot of wacky shit happened with that game too. Great game in its own right, but there is like a definitive good ending when it comes to 10-2 that is canon, given Final Fantasy X will, where we do get to see the follow up to the ending of Final Fantasy X, like the post credit scene where it seems implied that like Tidus isn't like fully dead or maybe back alive or whatever the fuck. We get that kind of conclusive follow up where we get to see Tidus and Yuna reunite. I don't really remember off the top of the head what goes into the multiple different kind of endings you can get for 10-2, other than I know like for that ending you gotta like whistle at a particular point in the far plane like a handful of times or something, and you're not prompted to do it. It's something like you can do. That's how you get that, I guess, ending right there. But that is an example of us having multiple endings in the Final Fantasy franchise, and of course when it comes to the FF7 compilation, we've kind of seen this with Dirge Cerberus, where the game does, of course, have a standard ending when you beat the game, but if you collect all the G files, I think like 3 of them throughout the game, you get a secret ending after this one, where we, of course, get more of everybody's favorite character, Genesis, where he just spawns in this cavern and picks up Vice's body and just fucks off, I guess. And we have technically kind of, sort of seen multiple ending stuff when it comes to the remake games, but specifically it was for the remake demo, where when you just set the bomb timer, I think you had to do like the least amount of time and then just beat it, and you got like this cutscene right here, this trailer, whatever, that kind of shows off more of the game. It's not a different ending, obviously, but it is something that you had to do a particular thing in the game to change what you see. And honestly, the route they went with Dirge Cerberus is something I wouldn't mind them doing with Remake Part 3, where you beat the game and you have just your standard ending, but there could be like a true ending or a secret ending if you do something. If you collect particular items, or maybe just do everything in the game that you have to do, or maybe beat the game on hard mode or something along those lines, we can unlock like an additional cutscene or cutscenes. I much prefer that over something like Final Fantasy X-2 that just has multiple endings, right? Like, I don't necessarily want that for a Final Fantasy game. I don't think that works for most Final Fantasy games. It can work for X-2 just because there's like percentage completion and there's all kinds of like miscellaneous objective and missable things, and so it kind of makes sense that there would maybe be like a multiple ending thing to that game. But most Final Fantasies are pretty straightforward, right? So I think that like having multiple endings doesn't really work for most games. But having like an additional cinematic that plays after the credits or after the actual ending of the game, based on you doing particular things throughout the game, I think is fine, right? As long as I wouldn't want it to be like an additional cutscene that completely changes the context of the ending, where like this is the the ending you get when you beat the game, this is the true ending that completely changes the context of this ending, and none of this actually matters because this is what actually happens. Like, I wouldn't want it to be something like that. I just want it to be like an additional thing you get that gives you more lore, essentially, if that makes any sense. I will say though too that multiple endings does make a bit of sense when it comes to something FF7 related, because we've always had choices, right? And it does exist in a lot of Final Fantasy games. You have dialogue choices that affect stuff. I'm playing through FF9 right now. There's all the fucking active time events, and like a lot of that, there's a lot of intricacies to that shit, right? Where you gotta pick particular dialogues and do things in particular orders to be able to see all the scenes, right? It's very fucking annoying. But with FF7, of course, you have the affection system, where your dialogue and things you do throughout the game decide who you go on the date with eventually, right? But also with Remake, we have this where depending on what you do throughout the game can decide particular stuff, right? Whether that's dialogue stuff or the amount of side quests you do can determine on what dress each character gets, right? What outfit they get during, you know, the wall market segments. And then also, like, depending on what you do with the kind of affection system in the background, can determine the resolution scene that you get whenever you're outside of, like, Aerith's house or whatever. And whatever chapter that is, I don't remember off the top of my head. I haven't played through Remake in a little bit. And then also, I think depending on what you do throughout Remake determines who joins you in the Sephiroth fight in what particular order at the end of the game. Naturally, of course, we do have FF7 Rebirth, which does have the date scene from original FF7, so there's an actual affection system that determines that shit, depending on, you know, side quests and things that you do or whatever. Dialogue choices as well. There's also something that determines, like, the Genova Lightclinger fight and, like, the window that pops up on the right side of, like, all the characters, like, whatever order that is, determines, like, where they pop up during, like, the gauntlet of fights you do against, like, Sephiroth and Sephiroth Reborn and shit. I don't know what all goes into that, but there's, like, something that affects that, right? And there's potentially more to, like, the choices and dialogue choices and affection system and stuff in Rebirth, maybe that I'm not aware of, but at least, like, there's the dating scene and, like, the fight at the end of the game, where, like, what you do throughout the game matters. So I bring that all up because, in theory, there should be something like that in the third game, because we've had that so far with the 2 out of the 3 games for the trilogy, right? Where, like, things you do in the game affect other scenes in the game. Nothing's affected the ending of the game yet, but maybe that's something they could do. I don't know if they're going to even have the affection system. It'd be kind of weird to, like, introduce that in the second game. I know that the date mechanic is why, the date scene's why there's an affection system, but it'd be, like, a weird thing to introduce into the games, right? And then we get to the third game and there's no longer an affection system. I don't know if they're going to keep it or not. I don't. Also, that I do hope they keep, like, the dialogue wheel that we kind of have right now, just because, like, that was a nice surprise. You know, coming off of Remake, I never would have expected that, even though we do have, like, dialogue choices a bit in Remake, and then we obviously have it in the original FF7, like, having an actual wheel of choices where there's, like, a, you know, pretty obvious, like, good guy, you know, good affection answer than some other ones. Like, that's nice, dude. I hope they actually keep that, even if we don't have, like, an actual affection system in the next game. And actually thinking about it, there is more to the affection system in the original FF7 beyond the date scene with the Under the Highwind segment, right? Where, like, depending on your affection for Tifa specifically, regardless of who you got on the date with, you could have gone on the date with Barrett. It's just based on your Tifa affection, you know, it affects that scene. I think there's just 2 different versions, right? Where, like, Cloud's a little more, like, sweet and romantic, more or less, to Tifa versus, like, kind of being a little more cold to her, if that makes any sense. I did a whole video about this a couple years ago, talking about the Under the Highwind segment, whether or not there actually be implied sex and stuff like that, but we actually broke down the 2 different versions of the Under the Highwind segment if you want to go watch that. It is something they could do in part 3, where, like, what you do throughout the game up to the Highwind scene can affect it, where you get, like, a different outcome depending. It's kind of a topic for another video, really, is whether or not there'd be, like, different versions of the Under the Highwind segment in the third game based on what you do throughout the game, right? I think the concept of multiple endings can work for the third game if they go the route of Dirge of Cerberus, where it's like, here's the ending of the game, and then if you do other shit, you can get, like, this secret cutscene or something, right? That doesn't actually give you, like, a different ending. I don't want multiple endings in the realm of 10-2 or other games where it's like, everybody dies, everybody lives, some people die, some people live. Like, that kind of ending, I don't want there to be, because I want there to be a canonical ending, right? And if you do multiple endings, you can make an argument for which one is actually canon, and I don't want that for... Of course, this is where I pass off you guys. So the idea of there being multiple endings for part 3, what are your thoughts on that overall? Yes or no? But if it's a yes, in what way do you want it? Do you want it like the 10-3 route, the, you know, near Automata route, or Silent Hill route, or whatever, where there's just like 5 different endings, 10 different endings? Or whether you just want it to be something like Dirge of Cerberus, or just like one particular ending? That's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social network in the description below. Follow me through dashingdavidbusiness. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane, we in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.